Welcome to the Voices of Davos here in SandboxAQ on the Promenade. Today we have with us Alexandra. Alexandra, thanks for coming and please introduce yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me here in Davos. My name is Alexandra Mousavizadeh. I am the co-founder and CEO of Evident.
Fantastic, thank you. So one thing that straight away comes when you search your name via an LLM or via Google is the Global AI Index. And I think this is very relevant right now in Davos because everybody talks about AI. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. It was an index that I established in a previous role at Tortoise Media that was founded by James Harding. It was the first endeavor to try and put some data around something as difficult to put your arms around as AI, as nebulous as AI. And back then it was obviously mainly traditional machine learning, deterministic AI that we were focusing on because the foundation models hadn't been released by then. And so that index basically was focusing on looking at these ecosystems and how strong they were. And so the index is still going, but I left that behind when I started Evident.
Okay, so tell us about Evident.
Yeah, so Evident was some of the bigger banks, as we know, spend a lot of money. JP Morgan spends 18 billion and so on and so forth. And in 2022, and this again was before ChatGPT was released, there were some that came to me and said, look, this methodology that you've built for nations, would you be able to create something using that methodology to rank or to benchmark us banks on where we sit vis-a-vis each other, because we really want to know we're spending so much, on technology to run the bank, but also more and more on the change the bank, and AI is a big component of that. So we rank them on their investments into the capabilities and now also on their performance, so on their ROI. So we took the 50 largest banks in North America and Europe and ranked them according to their AI. Now we're in a big expansion mode. We are doing the same rankings for the Middle East banks, for the banks in Asia, for the banks in Latin America. We're also doing the same thing for insurance. And in 2 weeks, we release the index on payment platforms. And then we're also going to do one on asset management. And then we go deeper into the bank's lines of business. How are you performing on your KYC? How are you doing in your investment banking arm or your wealth or your retail and so on? Now, this year, we've also been fortunate enough for the banks saying, okay, but we would also like to share our data with you on things that is immeasurable from the outside. So that is the actual exact AI spend going to people and hardware and software, the entirety of the use cases across the bank. So all of the lines of business and functions, where the use cases are in terms of table stakes, sort of the normal ones that everyone's doing versus the sort of emerging ones and versus the frontier use cases. And then we also get all their ROI data. And so now we can, behind the scenes, also give them an assessment of the efficacy of their AI spend. Where are they spending it? Are they getting, the ROI that they want? Are they getting the ROI that is as good, better, or worse than their peers? And I think, safe to say that we're very much moving into the conversation or an era now where it's all about impact and scale and ROI. And we're sort of off to the races.
Yeah, it's amazing. So there's one sort of measure that is public and one that is private to the bank for them sort of to improve. And when you do those measurements, do you use AI as well?
Absolutely. But it's tough when you've got data sets that are so unstructured.
Yeah.
I mean, you can use AI on unstructured data, but actually we need to process it because everyone submits data. So on the private side, on the private benchmark on use cases and ROI, every bank will have a different way of calculating ROI. Every bank will have a different way of defining agentic systems, or even just a use case in production will be, some would say it's models, some would say it's use cases. And so we've got to do a lot of wrestling, which actually is incredibly interesting in and of itself.
Because I imagine all of these banks were talking about massive amounts of quantitative data and not necessarily data that comes with words over the internet.
Yes.
So I guess many times the LLM, and that's what we're seeing, are not really built to process the large amounts of quantitative data, and that's what why here in Sandbox we developed the quantitative models, the large quantity models, and we're seeing more of these models, a constellation of different models, each one for their specific workloads that they're best at.
Yeah.
Just to summarize, I guess, from your experience here at Davos, particularly from a geopolitical perspective, with the two-horse race between the US and China, it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. What role does Europe play?
Well, I mean, it has been hotly debated. There is a question around, are we in Europe doing enough in terms of spending? We are still, even though we're a union, there's fragmentation. There is still, it's a very attractive place. There's money being spent. We do see companies springing up in the UK and the rest of Europe. But there is a question of being able to hold on to those companies. And as of now, you know, the trend has been that when you get to a certain size, you do go off to the United States because of the ecosystem, because of the capital availability, because of the learnings, and eventually also maybe a better place to IPO your company if that's the pathway you're going for. So I do actually worry a bit. I think that you know, European tech sovereignty and AI sovereignty is probably more important now than ever. And at the same time, I don't know if we are feeling the urgency enough to really get that spending moving. I think the Draghi report, which is being cited over and over again here in Davos this week, the Draghi report was again also one of the big wake-up calls to Europe and to say you need to get moving. But the binary aspect is definitely going to come along with quantum, because whoever really gets to that edge will have capabilities to completely upend our world as we know it, and definitely in terms of transactions. And as you, I'm sure, know, a lot of the banks are already focusing on quantum, and I know that you work with them as well. But that would be one where I would say, you know, if we can't win in Europe the AI race, how about we try win the quantum race? I think that would be very handy. And you know, we've yet to see, I think, sufficient amounts of capital going into that in Europe.
Fantastic. Lots to talk about and lots of things are happening.
Definitely.
But thank you very much for your time, Alexandra.
Yes.
Great to introduce you here.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.